Have you ever just, stopped and wondered what it really means to be alive? And I'm not talking about some big philosophical question. I mean, biologically speaking, turns out life isn't so much about grand gestures, it's more like a constant, invisible, and totally relentless maintenance job. Let's dive in.
Okay, so let's start with the most basic question of all. How do we even draw the line between something that's alive and something that isn't? It sounds super simple, right? But, well, the answer gets complicated really, really fast.
I mean, it seems obvious, doesn't it? A rock just sits there. A rabbit, well, it hops around, it breathes, it eats. But if we had to actually write down the rules for being alive, what would they even be? What's the specific checklist we're using in our heads?
We might say, well, movement. A running dog is definitely alive. A plant growing toward the sun? Yep, alive. But what about when that dog is fast asleep? It's not moving at all, but we all know it's still alive. So visible movement, that can't be our only rule. It's just not a reliable enough test. This is where we have to zoom way, way in. Because the real signs of life, the things that truly matter, aren't always the big ones we can see with our eyes. Nope. The most essential, nonstop action is happening on a scale that is completely invisible.
And here's the key idea. It's called molecular movement. Biologists pretty much agree that for something to be considered alive, it has to have this constant internal motion of molecules, all working to repair and maintain its own structure. This is actually why scientists still debate whether viruses are truly alive. On their own, they do nothing. They're just sitting there. They only show this molecular movement when they hijacked a living cell. So why is all this tiny internal repair job so important? Well, because life is in a constant knockdown, drag-out fight against chaos. It's a battle against the natural forces of the universe that are always trying to break things down. Think about it. Living things are these incredible, highly organized structures, from tissues and organs all the way down to the individual cells. But the universe, it naturally trends towards disorder and decay. So the environment is constantly wearing that beautiful organization down. To stay alive, an organism has to pour energy into constantly repairing that damage, day in and day out. And that brings us right to the heart of it. To be alive is to perform this constant maintenance job. All those things we think of as life, eating, breathing, sleeping, they're all just different parts of this one continuous job. And we call these functions life processes. So if being alive is a maintenance job, what's in the toolbox? Well, let's break down the essential processes that every living thing needs to get the work done. First things first, every job needs fuel and supplies. For life, that's nutrition. It's the whole process of getting energy and raw materials, what we call food, from the outside world. You can't fix a thing without power and spare parts. And for living organisms, that's exactly what food is. Okay, so you've got the fuel delivered. Now what? You have to turn it into actual usable power. That's respiration. It's the chemical process, usually involving oxygen, that breaks down food to unlock the energy your cells need to actually do all that repair work. Now, in a big, complex organism, not every cell gets to be right next to the mouth or the lungs. So you need a delivery service, right? A transportation system is absolutely crucial for hauling food, oxygen, and all the other essentials from where they come in to every single other part of the body. And finally, any big project creates trash. The same chemical reactions that give us energy also create waste products, some of which can be pretty toxic. Excretion is the body's garbage disposal system. It's essential for clearing out all that junk so the whole system doesn't get poisoned from the inside out.
All right, let's zoom back in on that first tool in the kit, nutrition. Because how an organism gets its fuel is one of the most fundamental dividing lines in the entire story of life.
On the most basic level, you can split all life into two teams. First, you've got the autotrophs. Think of them as the makers. These are your green plants. They literally build their own food from simple stuff like CO2 and water. And then you have the heterotrophs, the takers. That's us. We get our energy by eating the complex stuff that others have already made. As heterotrophs, we completely depend on the makers. But here's the catch. We can't just use that complex food as is. We have to break it down into tiny, simple molecules our bodies can actually use. And to do that, we have these amazing little molecular tools, biological catalysts called enzymes.
So, to see how this all really works, let's take a little trip through the one example we're all experts on: our own digestive system. We're going to follow a piece of food from the very start to the very finish to see this incredible maintenance task in action. And here is our roadmap: the alimentary canal. It's basically just one long, coiled up tube that starts at the mouth and runs all the way to the other end. But don't let that fool you. Different parts of this tube are incredibly specialized to do very, very different jobs. Our journey begins in the mouth, and it's not just about your teeth crushing the food. The second the food hits your tongue, a full-on chemical attack begins. Your saliva is loaded with an enzyme called amylase, and it immediately gets to work, breaking down complex starches into much simpler sugars. Next stop, the stomach. Here, powerful muscular walls churn everything up, mixing it with some seriously potent digestive juices. We're talking hydrochloric acid, which creates a super acidic environment, and that in turn activates an enzyme called pepsin, whose one and only job is to start tearing proteins apart. From the stomach, the mushy food moves into the small intestine. And this, my friends, is where the main event really happens. This is the site of the complete digestion of everything: carbs, proteins, and fats. It gets a lot of help from its neighbors, the liver and the pancreas, which pump in even more specialized juices and enzymes to finish the job once and for all. And get this, the design of this whole tube is perfectly tailored to what an animal eats. Herbivores munching on tough grass need a really long small intestine to give their body enough time to break down all that cellulose. But carnivores, like a tiger, they have a much shorter one because meat is way easier to digest. It's just a perfect example of form following function. Okay, so the food is broken down. Now, how does it actually get into our body? Well, the inside of the small intestine is lined with millions of these tiny finger-like things called villi. Their job is to create a massive surface area for absorption. They're packed with blood vessels that just grab all those nutrients and ship them out to every single cell in the body, where they are finally put to work for energy, growth, and that never-ending maintenance job. So, from that invisible dance of molecules all the way up to this incredibly complex factory running inside you right now, it's all just part of the constant, relentless job of staying alive. When you think about all the intricate machinery and all the energy it takes just to keep going for one more day, it really makes you stop and think, doesn't it? What does all this effort say about the value of being alive in the first place?
How does a plant know to grow towards the sun? Or, how do you snatch your hand away from a hot stove before you even register the pain? It feels like magic, right? But it's actually this brilliant biological system at work. Today, we're going to dive into the incredible world of control and coordination in, well, all living things.
Yeah, let's stick with that hot stove example for a second. Your hand pulls back instantly. I mean, way before your brain has even had a chance to say, hey, that's hot. That's not some random fluke. It is a hardwired, super high-speed response system. And you know what it's all about? One simple thing: survival.
And it's not just about dodging danger either. Think about a cat chasing a mouse or a plant bending towards a sunny window. Heck, even a buffalo just chewing its cud. All of these are movements. All of them are responses to the world around them. The bottom line is, all life is in this constant conversation with its surroundings. And to really thrive, you absolutely need these systems for control and coordination. So in animals, the main way this happens is through what you can think of as a biological superhighway. It's this incredible, high-speed electrical grid that shoots messages around in literally the blink of an eye. Yep, we're talking about the nervous system. And the basic, fundamental building block of this whole network? It's the neuron. Seriously, you can just picture it as a living, biological wire, one that's perfectly designed to send information using these tiny little electrical signals. Okay, so how does a message actually get from point A to point B along these neurons? Well, it's like this incredible relay race. The signal kicks off as an electrical impulse at one end, the dendrites, and then it just zips down this long part called the axon. But here's the cool part. To get to the next neuron, it can't just jump. There's a tiny gap. So it triggers the release of chemicals across that gap. That's the synapse. And those chemicals spark a brand new electrical impulse in the next cell. It's this amazing switch from electricity to chemistry and right back to electricity again. So cool.
So, after this epic journey, jumping from neuron to neuron, the signal finally reaches its destination. And a lot of the time, that's a muscle cell. At this final handoff point, what we call the neuromuscular junction, the last impulse gets delivered. The muscle gets its command: contract. And just like that, a thought or a reflex, turns into a real physical action.
Okay, and this brings up a really crucial distinction, because not all actions are created equal, right? Your nervous system is basically managing two very different types of responses. You've got the lightning-fast automatic reflex, and then you have the slower, more deliberate action that comes from actual conscious thought.
So what's the difference? Well, it all comes down to the path the signal takes. A reflex action, like pulling your hand from the stove, is involuntary and unbelievably fast because it takes a shortcut. The signal literally just zips to your spinal cord and then bounces right back out to the muscle. The brain isn't even part of the decision. But a thoughtful, voluntary action, like, say, deciding to pick up a book, that signal has to travel all the way up to the brain for processing, and that, of course, is going to take a little more time.
And that's exactly why thinking takes time. Your brain is this incredibly dense, complicated web of neurons. Making a conscious choice means processing countless signals from all over. The reflex arc is just evolution's brilliant solution to that bottleneck. It's a life-saving shortcut for those moments when even a split-second delay could be really, really dangerous.
All right, so that's animals covered. But what about organisms that don't even have a nervous system? I mean, plants don't have nerves or muscles, but they definitely move and respond to their world all the time. So how in the world do they pull it off? Well, it turns out they have their own, equally clever solutions.
Just look at the famous touch-me-not plant. You know, the sensitive plant? Its rapid folding movement has nothing to do with growth. When you touch it, this electrical chemical signal shoots from cell to cell, basically telling them to dump water, and fast. This sudden change in water pressure makes the leaves collapse almost instantly. It's a totally physical response without a single muscle, just some really clever hydraulics. But that kind of fast movement is pretty rare in the plant world. The most common way plants move is actually much, much slower, and it's tied directly to how they grow. There's a name for it: tropism. It's basically where a plant strategically directs its own growth over days or even weeks, which lets it navigate its world in what you could call super slow motion.
And plants have this whole toolbox of different growth strategies they can use. They bend towards light to get as much sun as possible for photosynthesis. We call that phototropism. They respond to gravity, always sending roots down and shoots up. That's geotropism. They can even grow their roots towards water or follow chemical trails, like a pollen tube finding its way to an ovule. It might be slow motion, but it is an incredibly precise way to navigate.
Okay, so let's recap. We've seen the super fast electrical signals in animals, and we've seen the slow, growth-based movements in plants. But what if I told you there's another system, a slower, chemical-based one that both plants and animals share? Yep, we're talking about the body's chemical messengers, hormones.
The best way to think about the difference is to imagine a telephone versus a radio broadcast. The nervous system is like that direct telephone wire. It's incredibly fast, super specific, a one-to-one connection. Hormones, on the other hand, are like a radio broadcast. A chemical signal gets sent out and it travels through the whole body, affecting any cell that's tuned in to receive that specific message. It's definitely slower, but its reach is just massive.
In the plant world, hormones are basically the master architects. Take a hormone called auxin, for instance. It builds up on the shady side of the stem, which makes those cells grow longer, and that's what physically bends the plant towards the sun. You've got other hormones that trigger stem growth or cell division, but it's not all just a gas pedal. There's also a brake, a hormone called abscisic acid, that halts growth when conditions aren't right. They all work together to guide pretty much the plant's entire life. And in animals, hormones often act like the first responders in an emergency. We've all felt this. Think about adrenaline. You get into a scary situation and boom, it's released into your blood. Suddenly, it's acting on all these different organs at the same time. Your heart beats faster, your breathing rate goes up, blood gets pumped to your muscles. It's one single chemical signal that prepares your entire body for one of two things: fight or flight.
So there you have it. From the instantaneous snap of a reflex arc to the slow, deliberate bend of a plant towards the sun, life uses this incredible combination of electrical grids and chemical messengers to sense and respond to the world. It just goes to show how complex and amazing communication can be. And it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other, even more subtle communication systems are out there, just waiting for us to discover?
Ever really thought about one of the most basic rules of life? I mean, everything from the tiniest microbe to the biggest blue whale, it's all driven by this ancient, really powerful urge to just make more of itself. But why? Okay, let's get into it and unpack this incredible story of how life makes more life. So, here's a little puzzle for you. An organism doesn't actually need to reproduce to stay alive, right? You know, things like eating, breathing, getting rid of waste, those are absolutely essential for an individual to survive. But reproduction? That takes a massive amount of energy. So why bother with a process that doesn't really help you personally survive day to day?
And the answer is actually brilliantly simple. It's not about the individual. It's all about the species. See, reproduction is the only way to make sure a species keeps going. Without it, any form of life would just be a one-generation wonder. It would just blink out of existence as soon as the original members died off.
I mean, think about it. A single creature that can't reproduce would just live its life and poof, it's gone. But when organisms create new individuals that look and act like them, they make sure their kind sticks around, generation after generation. It's basically life's ultimate copying machine.
Okay, so how does that copying machine actually work? Well, if you want to make a copy of something, you first need a blueprint, right? For every living thing, that blueprint is tucked away deep inside the nucleus of every cell, and we call it DNA.
DNA holds all the instructions for building an organism. You can think of it like a super detailed recipe book for making proteins. And those proteins build everything, from the color of your eyes to the enzymes in your stomach. So really, when you boil it all down, the most basic event in reproduction is just making a copy of this DNA blueprint. So how does a cell pull this off? Well, it all kicks off with making a perfect copy of its DNA. Then it has to duplicate all its internal machinery, the whole cellular apparatus. And finally, in this really incredible move, it just splits right down the middle. And boom, you have two new, very similar cells, each one with its own complete set of instructions.
So the simplest way to reproduce follows that basic plan. Just one parent making copies of itself. This is what we call asexual reproduction. And let me tell you, single-celled organisms have perfected some pretty amazing and super efficient ways to do it.
So let's take fission, for example. In single-celled organisms like this amoeba, the whole process is incredibly direct. The cell just kind of stretches out and splits into two identical daughter cells. It's probably the most straightforward kind of reproduction you can imagine. One just becomes two. Simple as that.
Then you have other organisms, like the hydra, that reproduce through budding. A little, genetically identical outgrowth, a bud, starts to form on the parent's body. Once it gets mature enough, it just pops off and starts its own life as a perfect little clone.
And then there's one of nature's true superpowers, regeneration. A flatworm, like the planaria, has this unbelievable ability. If you cut it into pieces, each and every one of those pieces can regrow into a complete new organism. It's this amazing strategy that turns what should be a total disaster into a reproductive opportunity.
Okay, so making exact copies seems fast, it seems efficient, but it's got a huge weakness. If every single individual in a population is identical, well, they all share the exact same vulnerabilities. So what happens when the environment decides to change?
Well, it turns out even the best copying machine on the planet makes a few mistakes. The process of copying DNA, it isn't 100% perfect. Tiny, random errors, or what we call mutations, can creep in, creating these subtle little differences between the parent and the offspring. And those little mistakes, they're not a bug. They're a feature. Seriously, imagine a population of bacteria just chilling in some temperate water. If a sudden heat wave hits, all the identical bacteria might just get wiped out. But what if a few of them have a random variation that makes them a little more heat resistant? Well, they survive, they reproduce, and they pass on that successful trait. Variation is the raw material for survival.
So this really brings us to two main strategies for survival. On one hand, you've got asexual reproduction. It's fast, you only need one parent, but it generates variation really slowly. You're just relying on those random copy errors. On the other hand, sexual reproduction. It's slower, you need two parents, but boy, is it a powerhouse for creating high genetic variation.
So if life needs to speed up the whole process of creating variation, how does it do it? The answer was this totally revolutionary new strategy, sexual reproduction. Instead of just waiting around for random errors, organisms started to actively mix and match their genetic blueprints.
The real power of sexual reproduction is that it takes all the built-up variations from two different parents and shuffles them all together, kind of like a deck of genetic cards. This creates brand new combinations in every single offspring, which rapidly increases the diversity in a population and gives the species a way better chance of adapting to whatever changes come its way.
Okay, but hold on. This creates a new math problem, doesn't it? If one cell with a full set of DNA combines with another cell with a full set of DNA, wouldn't their offspring have double the amount? And then their offspring would have double that. I mean, things would get way out of control fast. So how does life solve this puzzle?
Life's solution is this incredibly elegant process called meiosis. It's a special kind of cell division that's made specifically for creating sex cells or germ cells like sperm and eggs. Instead of making a full copy of the DNA, meiosis creates cells that have only half the normal amount. That way, when a half set from one parent combines with a half set from the other, the offspring gets restored to one complete, correct set of genetic instructions. Pretty clever, right?
Now, let's bring all these big ideas home and take a look at the species we know best, us. We humans use sexual reproduction, and that whole journey really kicks off when our bodies start to mature during that period of adolescence that we call puberty.
And this development leads to two highly specialized systems. The male reproductive system is designed to do one main thing: produce and deliver the male germ cell, sperm. The female reproductive system, on the other hand, is designed not just to produce the female germ cell, the egg, but also to house and nourish the embryo as it develops.
This whole process is a truly remarkable journey. It all starts with a race, as millions of sperm travel to find a single egg. If one makes it, fertilization happens, and that creates the very first cell of a new life, a zygote. This one cell starts to divide, growing into an embryo that implants itself in the wall of the uterus. And it's here that a special organ called the placenta forms, connecting mother and child and providing all the oxygen and nutrients needed for the next 9 months.
So, for billions of years, life's one and only goal has been to copy and pass on its genetic blueprint, with variation being the absolute key to survival. But now, for the first time in the history of the planet, we have the technology to edit that blueprint ourselves. It really makes you wonder, as we start taking control of our own code, what is that going to mean for the future of our species?
Have you ever looked in the mirror and, just for a second, seen your mother's eyes looking back? Or maybe you have your grandfather's laugh. Well, that's not just a coincidence. That's heredity. It's the invisible code that makes you, well, you. Today, we're going to crack that code and figure out how traits get passed down, connecting all of us in one giant family tree.
So let's start with the biggest question of all. How is it possible? How can you be this perfect mix of your parents, but at the same time be completely and totally unique? It's not magic, I promise. It's actually a fascinating set of rules, and the clues begin with something surprisingly simple. Go ahead, take a look at your own ears for a second. Seriously, are the lobes hanging free, or are they attached directly to the side of your head? Believe it or not, that tiny little detail is a classic inherited trait, one of thousands you got from your parents. And it was by looking at simple, clear-cut things like this that the whole mystery of heredity first started to unravel. So let's dive into our investigation, starting with this central puzzle, the family resemblance mystery. How does nature make sure we look like our relatives, but also shuffle the deck to make every single person one of a kind?
Okay, here's the first big clue. It's all about a 50-50 split. For almost every trait, from your earlobes to your hair color, you get one set of instructions from your mom and another from your dad. But that brings up a huge question. If you have 2 different instructions, which one wins? To answer that, we need to meet the guy who first figured it all out. And to do that, we have to travel back in time. And our detective? He wasn't in some high-tech lab. Nope. He was in a monastery garden, working with something you'd probably never expect, the common pea plant.
This is Gregor Mendel, and you know, his superpower wasn't a fancy microscope or anything like that. It was math. See, while everyone else just noticed that, yeah, kids look like their parents, Mendel's background in science and math let him count and categorize. He was looking for the patterns, the hidden rules of the game that nobody else could see.
And this is where he had his stroke of genius. He kept it simple. He took a purebred tall pea plant and crossed it with a purebred short one. Now, you might expect the baby plants to be kind of medium-sized, right? But that's not what happened. All of them were tall. The short trait just disappeared. But here's the brilliant part. Mendel then let those tall plants reproduce with each other. And guess what? The short trait came back, like a ghost in the machine. About a quarter of this new generation were short, so the trait wasn't gone, it was just hiding.
That reappearing trait, that was the aha moment. It was the crucial clue that led Mendel to discover the fundamental rules that control how we inherit things, rules we now call dominant and recessive.
Mendel realized he was basically watching a power struggle. Some traits, which he called dominant, will always show up if they're there. You only need one copy of the tall instruction for the plant to be tall. But other traits, the recessive ones, are kind of shy. They're still there, but they're hidden. The only way for the short trait to actually appear is if a plant gets 2 copies of that instruction, one from each parent. And that perfectly explained why shortness vanished for a generation and then popped right back up.
But Mendel didn't stop there. He started to wonder, are traits linked together? Like, if a pea plant is tall, does it have to have round seeds? Or could you get a tall plant with wrinkled seeds? Basically, he was asking if traits are inherited as a package deal, or if they're all shuffled and dealt out independently, like cards in a deck.
So he ran the experiment again. This time he tracked 2 different traits at once, seed shape and seed color. He crossed a plant with dominant round yellow seeds with one that had recessive wrinkled green seeds. Just like before, the first generation all showed only the dominant traits. But when he crossed that generation, that's when the real magic happened. He didn't just get the original combinations, he got brand new ones. He got round green seeds and wrinkled yellow seeds. The traits were being totally mixed and matched.
And the most amazing part, it wasn't random chaos. Just like before, Mendel counted everything, and he found this incredible hidden pattern, a super predictable mathematical ratio of 9 to 3 to 3 to 1. This was the ultimate proof. It showed that the gene for seed shape and the gene for seed color are inherited completely independently. They don't stick together. And this constant shuffling is a huge reason why there's so much awesome variety among all living things, even within the same family. So, we've got the rules, but how does it all actually work? What is the physical thing inside our cells that carries all these instructions? Well, this brings us to our modern understanding of the genetic blueprint. What Mendel called factors, we now call genes. And a gene is really just a specific section of your DNA, that famous double helix. Think of it like a recipe in a cookbook. Each gene is a recipe for building one specific thing, which is usually a protein. And it's those proteins that do all the heavy lifting in our bodies to create our traits. Let's connect this right back to Mendel's tall plants. The tall gene has the recipe for a really efficient enzyme. That enzyme helps the plant make a lot of growth hormone, and boom, the plant gets tall. The short gene is just a slightly different recipe that makes a less efficient enzyme. Less hormone gets made, and the plant stays short. It's this beautiful direct chain of command, from the gene to the protein to the trait you can actually see. So how do these rules apply to us humans? Well, let's look at one of the most fundamental traits of all, biological sex. It turns out it's a perfect real-world example of Mendel's principles in action. It's basically a genetic coin flip. Okay, so inside our cells, all that DNA is packed into little structures called chromosomes. Humans have 23 pairs of them. Now, 22 of those pairs are the same for everybody, but it's that 23rd pair that determines our biological sex. Females have 2 matching X chromosomes, so XX, and males have 1 X and 1, much smaller, Y chromosome, XY. Now think about how this plays out. A mother has 2 X chromosomes, right? So every single egg she produces will carry an X. A father, on the other hand, has both an X and a Y. So half of his sperm carry an X and the other half carry a Y. This means it all comes down to a 50-50 chance. If a sperm with an X chromosome fertilizes the egg, the result is XX, a girl. If a Y sperm wins the race, it's XY, a boy. So the father's contribution is actually the deciding factor. So the parent whose contribution determines the sex of a child, it's the father. It all comes down to that 50-50 chance, a perfect genetic coin flip. You know, from a quiet monastery garden to the blueprint of our own lives. The same elegant rules that Mendel found in his pea plants are the very same rules that write the first chapter of every human story. It really makes you wonder, what other simple rules might be governing all the complex mysteries around us, just waiting for someone to start counting?